submerged aquatic vegetation in the Lake Tahoe, California area. So the features that we were using for this, it was 8-bit, very high resolution aerial imagery, so about half-meter resolution, and we had a stack of LiDAR metrics for slope, rugosity, and depth as well that we had with that. And the training for it were points and polygons. So I tested out a lot of models, and we'll sort of get into that as we go further on about what went well and what went wrong. But I looked at using the deep neural networks and the convolutional neural networks, both the UNET from the Google Earth Engine example, and I also tested out the dice loss from Biplov that Biplov shared earlier. I ran into quite a few caveats and issues, which I'll get into more with sort of the orders in which you're putting features into the models, having multiple models, issues with sampling, and just overall organizational issues. So this is the sort of workflow overview, which we're all pretty familiar with by this point. I am exporting TF records for the samples in Colab, and then I train either the CNN or DNN model in Colab as well. Save these models to the Google storage, EEify them, host it on the AI platform, and then run inference in Google Earth Engine. Quick note on normalization. All the features for this, I used min-max linear normalization. I also explored using clamp normalization a little bit, which is just kind of interesting to see how the distributions changed in that. I would have thought they would have been similar or more similar, since it takes the because of the equation. I'm not sure why the distribution ends up like this, which is a question I have if anyone knows the answer to that. It could just be a Earth Engine bucket thing, though, when building the histograms. So for the DNN models, in general, I did random points within my training polygons, split them into 70-30 training testing. The input features, I sort of threw everything at it. So all the RGB, near-infrared, luminance, depth, slopes, rugosity, and bathymetric bottom depth and range normalized. Yeah, the equation for luminance is right here. That was actually something I pulled from one of the old TensorFlow Earth Engine, collabs. And the model was a Kerr sequential network. I used the atom optimizer and the binary cross entropy for loss. So overall, the DNNs resulted in overfitting whenever it would get over around 60% accuracy. And if you stopped it before it hit that, they were all pretty bad models. As you can see here in the series of images below, it's having difficulty identifying the deep water as water and not aquatic vegetation. So this top row here is the sort of probability layer that's spit out for the submerged aquatic vegetation. That bottom layer is a softmax classifier. So for the UNET model, did the same thing with 70-30 testing training, except this time it was just the polygons. For the features, I used the same ones, but I got rid of some of the LiDAR indices, which I'll talk about in a second. And again, I used the atom optimizer, and I looked at binary cross entropy and dice loss for the loss functions. So this is actually something I ran into with the DNN model and got rid of them pretty quickly, but I figured I'd touch on it here. So some of the LiDAR-derived products had artifacts in them. So on the left-hand side here is sort of banding issues in the rugosity layer. And on the right is the bare earth model, which got all of these, I guess, geometric errors in the shallow waters in the Keys in the Tahoe region. So I just got rid of those for the sake of exploration in TensorFlow modeling. So there's a couple of issues I ran into when trying to generate my samples for the CNN. And I'll just sort of touch on like what didn't work and what did work. So when I initially tried building samples for this, I just appended a single response value to the samples. And so this is what I was doing for the DNN models. I don't know if that makes complete sense, but essentially when you sample it, you're sampling it in an array, and I was just attaching a single value for the response. What was interesting is that you can actually still run your model doing it this way. So having an array predicting for the single value of your response variable. And you can actually waste a fair amount of time doing this because it takes a while to run these in Colab. But you run into issues when you try to use it, when you try to run inference in Google Earth Engine. I couldn't find the exact reason why, but I assume it's due to the input and output shapes of the tensors. So to work around that, what you do is you just convert your polygons to class value rasters. This works well. It works well with the UNET. Because I only had 2 classes, it was doable this way. Ideally, though, the model should be adjusted to reflect for the categorical classes rather than continuous values, which is how I believe it's set up. Yeah. So overall, I ran many models, and I came up with one that looked, somewhat all right, but it's still over predicted, particularly in the sandy areas on the right up here, if you can see that. Binary cross entropy performed better than the dice loss, but I honestly didn't have that much time to test that because I quickly got caught up in sort of recreation issues, which I'll get into. So in these 2 images, you see the output of the same model. And this is, I'm sure people realize this already, but the image on the left is like a red, green, blue depth. And the image on the right is depth, red, green, blue. And if you don't keep track of the order of your input features, these models you've made basically become useless. So the major issue I ran into is I had multiple models, multiple samples, features, and ordering as I was going through building out and exploring what the correct, combination would be to map aquatic vegetation. And sort of as going through in this learning, there was, I sort of evolved like what I thought was the correct naming conventions for my models. So not model 1, model 2, and then, model RGB XYZ. And another thing is if you're hosting it on the AI platform, when you EEify the model, you're not necessarily saving it in the same place or location. So, as I have grown wiser in my old age, my recommendations is to have a detailed naming convention, with your loss optimizer and the feature order, saving the samples in the same folder as the model, and also saving the EEified model in a subdirectory of your model, just to sort of keep it all in one place. Ultimately, though, I think having a logging file of just plain text information with everything is sort of beneficial, and that's kind of what I'm moving towards. Just having this little function that runs essentially right after you save your model, saving all of the parameters and hypertuning parameters that you're using. So yeah, I mean, other lessons learned, don't wait until you have a good model. I sort of started this out just doing sort of exploratory, just trying to see what works, what doesn't work, and then like as I get towards something good, I'll start paying more attention. These models can take, a couple hours at short to, 6 hours, 7 hours to run. It's worth it to make sure you're documenting everything you're doing as you're going along. Also, don't be a lazy coder like me. So on the left here, you can see one of the DNN sequential models, and just having all of these different dropout layers commented out, and it just makes it really unmanageable, and will make more work for you in the end when you have to go back and look at each model's descriptions and layer inputs to try and figure out what is what. Ultimately, making more samples is a really good use of your time rather than adding a bunch of layers and playing around with the models. And yeah, these things take a long time to fail. So it's difficult for rapid development. So it behooves you to really move slow and methodically when dealing with these things. And with that, I'm done. I'll take questions or comments, concerns, what have you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was a really fantastic presentation. Thanks for showing all your bruises on the way.
Oh yeah, and that's only some of them.
Yeah, let's open up to questions for everybody.
John, this is David. What did you do with this? Is this part of the aquatic project with Shane?
Yeah, I wrote a short sort of recap paper on it. I also was looking at using just like regular TensorFlow, or not TensorFlow, random forest modeling for this as well.
So did TRPA use this?
I don't know. No, maybe. I gave it to Shane. I don't know what he did with it.
You know what? Let's follow up on it, because this is nice. You did a nice job. So yeah, let's follow up and see if we can get this actually used by TRPA.
But yeah, I mean, there's more. I'm wiser now. There's more things I want to do with it, but it's also kind of gives me flashbacks
Yeah. The other thing too. So you
I-
did what snapshot in time did you do this for?
Just we just have one year. So this is using when was it flown? I think it was 2017. I don't remember, but it's a aerial imagery.
Yeah. Oh, this is the overflight then.
Yeah.
John, it seems like you had all the same issues that we also encountered in our journey. So that I was wondering about the number of training samples that you used and the size of the patches in the UNET.
Yeah, those are great questions and ones I have too. That's kind of why I want to start making this logging file because I didn't save them, so I don't really know. The size of the training, though, were pretty large. But like ultimately, I think like I just need more sample data because like I was just working off of what we had for valid submerged aquatic plants, and then the negative ones, so non-plants, I was doing, but I think it was mostly a sampling issue.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, that doesn't really help answer your question. I don't know. I mean, I can look into it, but I don't have that off the top of my head.
And where did you calculate the indices? Did you calculate them in Earth Engine and then export them in the TensorFlow? Or did
Oh,
you go to the architecture?
yeah. So I did everything in. So I did all the indices in Earth Engine in Colab. So the way I had it set up is I had the same way I was doing it for inference in like the code editor. I would just have that in Python in the Colab notebook. So, and I started breaking up I broke up the notebooks just into exporting features for one. So I just have it set up the same way I have it in the code editor. So I'm exporting them and normalizing them in the same way. And then right before I run inference, I make sure it's the exact same as the way I exported them.
I was wondering for the normalization, when you apply batch normalization in your model, doesn't that handle all the normalization procedures?
Yeah, but I don't know. I was under the impression that before you feed them into the model, that they should be normalized.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. The other thing too is like when you looked at your normalization slide, look at the range that you have.
Yeah, that's the clamp, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and this is what really surprised me actually with the clamp and why I didn't go with it is because it sort of has these towers at the end. But it shouldn't because it's using the same min max values that I'm using for this linear normalization. And all this is doing, like, it should still have the min at whatever this min is. It shouldn't be, it looks like a clamp, but it shouldn't be doing that if that's what the math is. Because I went into the Earth Engine source code to find out what clamp actually does. This is the actual equation for it. But yeah, I don't know. It could just be a bucketing issue. when they're drawing the histogram. But I mean, I was surprised by this, and I don't know which is better, because I mean, these values are obviously, outliers. So like, do they really matter that much for the model? Who's to say?
So then what are the numbers that you're running? So you're running this histogram, and then that 0.4 gets reclassified as a 0, and the 0.9 gets reclassified as a 1, and then you just use that distribution to reclass. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
And so then what happens is when you have those spikes on the end, you get I see what's happening. Oh yeah, that's strange. And there's no way to kind of trim.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
that's a good question for Chris. Ping Chris if you get a chance.
Chris
Brown.
I don't know Chris Brown.
Oh, I'll introduce you. So write me up that question, and I'll make an introduction for you.
Okay, cool.
Or if you do it with Tim, you know Chris. If you want to do it via Tim, then that way Tim can kind of communicate to everybody else. Either way is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's strange. And then the other one that's weird too. It's like when you're doing like the slide 7. Like, what is the difference? Like, you ran.
Yeah, so these are the columns are all different models, and so this top row here is so there is 2 classes in this, so it ends up with a probability for aquatic vegetation, which is this top row, and then not shown as a probability for not aquatic vegetation, and then this bottom layer is the softmax classification. So it's basically, choosing, I forget the exact logic behind it, but it's essentially choosing, whichever value is higher, and then being like, okay, that's not aquatic vegetation, or that is. But yeah, I mean, again, probably could be solved with more sample data, but there was, training polygons like right in this deep water area. So it should have been picking up.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah?
not to cut you off. What's the vertical column separation here between your gradient and your softmax for columns 1 through 3?
Say that again? I don't know.
Going across the top, going down, are those individual model runs?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. These are 3 different models.
Got it.
So the top row is your probability. The bottom row is your softmax differentiator, and then the reference data that you use for this is the one where they're out on boats collecting the actual data, right?
Yeah. So there was a few iterations. So yeah, there was actual like diver collected point data that was ultimately pretty useless for using in models. And then there was some polygon. So yeah, I used that for some of the both like regular ML models, and then also initially in the DNNs. But at some point, Shane got me polygons of the aquatic plants. I forget where he actually got those. I don't think he made them himself. But there were some polygons that were drawn up either by the divers or someone along the line.
Because the reason why I was asking is that because we also have bathymetry data for this area, right? Did you use bathymetry in any of this?
Yes. So the bathymetry layer, followed these sort of like weird artifacts that the rest of the LiDAR had. But the what is it? There was one bathymetry. Yeah, the bathymetric bottom depth and range normalized layer.
Uh-huh.
That was the only really useful one. So yeah, I did include that.
Okay. So then if you had that and then you had the diver data, which is at weird depths anyways, you'd have all the relationships between depth of a location is the optical view and then the bathymetry associated with that. And then and that still didn't work. That was still.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is like, there's not a real correlation between like NDVI for example, and like the submerged plants. Like when I plotted it all out when I was doing the regular like random forest modeling, because I was like, oh yeah, with depth and NDVI, you should see some sort of loose, or at least some sort of relation between that and the NDVI values, but they were just all over the map.
So
And I think
what was the strongest relationship then? Because you're getting something here.
yeah, I think the strongest relationship is this luminance layer, honestly. And that was again like I happened chance across that because I tested using the car hotspots TensorFlow notebook, the old one.
Yeah.
And that's what they were using for picking up cars, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, oh, I'm also using an 8-bit, RGB image. Let's see what that looks like. So I tested it out, and I was like, oh wow, it like really, it picks up these plants in the water pretty well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's an interesting finding by itself,
At least for the human eye, it's much easier to pick them out.
I got no more questions, Tim. I got a bunch, but I could ask them later.
Well, I mean, we've got 17 minutes, so I feel like we can ask away. This is a really interesting one. I think Ate, you mentioned this before, but you guys found a lot of the same stumbling blocks that John mentioned you guys had run into. And I thought of when we met up back in January before COVID, and you were talking about the order of your variables and keeping that all teased out as you actually go and run inference. And I think on slide 12, John, you did a side by side. And Ate, is that ultimately? I mean, I'm getting kind of foggy on the results, but like you displayed, your stacks of indices essentially, and the order at which you're calling them in. Did you get almost the same kind of like disparate results? Is this the same issue?
I think it's the same issue, Tim, because you need to keep track of your band order. So if sometimes they shift around, so if you feed in, let's say, blue, green, red, it might be shifted to green, blue, red. And then when you do your inference, it takes just the first band and combines it with the first band. It doesn't look at the names.
Yeah, I mean, I looked into it because I was sure for a while that I was like, oh, I must save this information somewhere, but I don't think it does, which is why I'm sort of proposing like logging all of this information and just keeping a log file with your model.
Yeah, John, I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, that's kind of the ongoing conversations that we're having about, different streams of development. Everyone's got a little bit of a different flavor of what they're doing, and like, what is the way to communicate not only within a hub but across hubs, like model implementation and different runs, and like then cross comparing the stats themselves. Because like if you're doing say BCE and dice, and in addition, like every other little twist you add on top of it, it pushes you further and further from a direct comparison. So like having that log would be the first step, I'd imagine, in sort of trying to figure out like objects, you know, apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So that kind of leads into my question of, or more of a prompt, I guess. Would you be willing to, I don't know if you're in the state to ready to share, but if you've got a GitHub or something with, you know, this working log and some of your work, you know, feel free to share it with us, and maybe we can pick through it and see what works and start to use it as a framework for other hubs too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Let me clean it up, because, you know, this sort of last one, when I said don't be lazy, is kind of one of the kinder snippets. Like, I think I still have a notebook where when we were working on it together at the TensorFlow with some notes from UNET on rice modeling.
I'll apologize right now.
But yeah. Let me clean it up a little bit, and then I'll push it to GitHub and share it with you.
That sounds great. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, John. So on slide 10, you showed the sampling schema that you got error while doing the inference on GE. So for that particular one, did you do the one-hot encoding in your TensorFlow model?
No.
Like where ones for audio labels and then zeros for all the non-label data, and then combine them together?
Yeah, so I didn't do the one hot encoding for this. I'd have to look at it to be sure. But it'd be, I was using whatever the default is, or whatever the original one is. So I was classifying them as, you know, floating points for 1 and 0. Just sort of, you know, get this continuous value, or an idea of a continuous value. But I think the main, or go on.
Yeah, because we also had similar issue with the surface water mapping that we are doing, and it turns out that when we did one hot encoding with our label data, and then at the end when we did the softmax on those label data, it works pretty well. For guess. So if maybe you can try doing one hot encoding and see if that makes any difference.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, do you have a notebook or anything you want to share?
Yeah, it's in the Servir Mekong GitHub repo. I can share the link with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. But yeah.
Yeah. Also on the logging and everything, we also went through the similar trouble, but we found that there's what they call the tuner, the Keras tuner, where you can provide the different hyperparameters for your model, and then it sort of goes through each of the parameters and then give you a log file as well. So that way you have a log of which loss function or which batch size, those kind of stuffs are used, and they also give you the final matrices. And I find that quite easy to put everything in one place as a JSON file or as a Google spreadsheet. So I think that would also be interesting for you to look at.
Like Keras tuner.
Yep.
Does that keep the order of your features though, or no?
It's just like training your model, but no, it doesn't keep the order of the features. You have to specify that, but it keeps the track of all the hyperparameters that are used in the model.
Oh, cool. That's good to know. That's what I was looking for, Biplov.
Yeah, that makes life quite easier for keeping the file and everything.
Oh, cool. Any other questions? I want to stop sharing my screen. Forgot I was even doing that.
Yeah, that's all from my side.
Well, I'll pause for another 10 seconds as someone formalizes their question if they've got it. All right, I think that's enough time. John, I want to thank you so much for presenting. Bruises and all, I think it was a really great presentation. Definitely outside of a lot of the other projects that everyone's been working on. So it's nice to have a different perspective. And it seems like it's nice to see. The big takeaway I saw was that not only everyone was sort of running into the same issues, which makes me think that we're either all together on the right path or on the wrong path. So that's at least uplifting there. So that's exciting to see. And I just want to say thank you so much for presenting. And I'll follow up if you want with Chris. But yeah, we can talk about that offline.